Ooh. Oh. Ta-da! Hello everyone. Thank you for joining me in this tutorial on basic coloring using Blick Studio alcohol markers. Basic coloring uses three colors to define an object along with black for deep shadows and white for bright highlights. Using this range, we can render form fairly realistically and make our coloring stand out much more compared to flat coloring, which we covered in the previous tutorial. In the context of coloring line art, black lines are already established for us, and any highlights we want to leave simply need to remain uncolored, or could be somewhat cleared out with the colorless blender. This first circle of the tutorial will be colored with 3 shades of yellow to create the illusion of a gold-colored sphere. I am using honey yellow as the darkest color, yellow ochre for a mid-tone, and canary yellow for the lightest yellow. I also make sure to outline a bright white highlight in the upper left section of the circle. All of the shading in this image assumes that light is hitting the sphere from the upper left. Our darkest colors will be placed in the furthest area from the light, while our lightest colors will run right up to the highlight. Each of the colors can be darkened a bit and blended together with additional layering. Once I lay in the yellow ochre midtone, I switch back to canary yellow and start coloring within the yellow ochre, working toward the highlight, but stopping short, which leaves a slightly lighter canary yellow ring around the highlight. Next, I add in the honey yellow shadow along the back edge of the sphere, and then switch back to the yellow ochre, blending those two colors into a softer gradient. Finally, I use the honey yellow again to darken the darkest shadow edge of the sphere. Basic coloring is fairly simple in theory, but rendering form requires a bit of understanding and practice in the effects of light and shadow on shapes and forms. Studying, drawing, and coloring objects around you in various lighting situations will be the best practice you can get to master this technique and apply it to your coloring art. We're not done with this tutorial yet, though. There's more to come. One of the most basic textural differences between objects in life is that some are matte, having little or no shine, while others are glossy and reflective, with bright white highlights. This time around, we're going to look at the basic difference between matte and gloss in these blue spheres. In this example, I will be coloring 2 spheres with a range of 3 blues, along with black and white for shadow and highlight. The darkest blue is ultramarine, middle blue is cerulean, and the lightest blue is light cerulean. Note that I do not leave a white highlight on the matte sphere. This is because matte objects tend to reflect light diffusely, which leaves more of the object color in the reflected light along with a much softer highlight area. The glossy sphere gets a bright white highlight, and I leave a small section of light color along the back edge in the shadow area. This is because glossy or shiny objects often reflect light from the ground or surrounding objects in that area, rather than becoming completely lost in darkness. While these 2 spheres appear a bit solid and with slightly different texture, we can still take things a step further in this tutorial. This time around, we're going to add some grayscale to further emphasize the effects of light and shadow as they pertain to matte and gloss, along with adding a cast shadow to our ground plane, which makes our objects look even more realistic. Using a light, medium, and dark gray, I am shading a sphere in the less reflective matte texture, and a second one in the more reflective glossy texture. When adding a cast shadow on the ground plane, it is important to keep in mind that shadows are darkest immediately around the object and become weaker as they spread out due to the increased amount of light hitting the ground from around the object. Notice how the shadow area of the glossy sphere has a larger medium-colored area in it. This is because glossy, reflective objects will also reflect light from the ground or surrounding objects in that area, although they do so with less intensity than the main light in the scene. I will be leaving the first two spheres gray, and the second two that I'm shading in will be colored as well to better illustrate the difference between matte and gloss on colored surfaces. I did make a little mistake here, leaving the shadow area of the matte sphere a bit lighter than I intended, but it is still darker than the glossy sphere. I made sure to outline the white highlight areas of the glossy sphere so that I don't accidentally color over them later, but those outlines really should have been lighter than they are. I am now coloring the matte sphere and cast shadow with a range of red colors. I used brick red for the darkest areas, red for the mid-tone, and orange for the lightest area. Since a matte object does not reflect as much light, there is no white highlight, but there is a sort of light orange spot. This could be pink instead, but I prefer orange for light red. If you study matte red objects under different colored lights, you will notice a much different color shift than I have depicted here. The glossy sphere is getting colored with a range of blues that include ultramarine for the dark blue, cerulean for the middle blue, and light cerulean for the lightest blue. I had some bleed in the upper highlight, and I applied the colorless blender there to help push the ink back out of the highlight a little bit. At this point, you might notice that the blue gloss sphere is the most realistic or three-dimensional looking of the group. This is largely due to the full range of contrast between white and black in that sphere and its shadow. Good contrast that delineates form is probably the most effective way to make something look like it has actual volume and feel real. As a final tip, and something for you to experiment with, gray saturation of an object will affect its color vibrance, and this can also suggest different surface materials, or even suggest dirty surfaces, as opposed to bright and clean ones. Applying more gray to an object in a poorly lit area of an image before coloring it can also help to ensure that it stays dull, rather than being too bright in comparison to the more well-lit and prominent objects in your scene. Wrapping up this video, I want to say thank you to my Patreon patrons who help to keep my art and videos flowing. If you're not a Patreon patron, you can join at patreon.com/EricPerkinsArtist for exclusive art downloads, progress updates on current projects, and more. Next week, I will be demonstrating basic coloring on page 7 of my fantasy coloring book, and if you'd like to color along, you can purchase the PDF download from my Patreon page or get it as part of your Patreon membership. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Let me know if this video has been helpful to you in the comments section, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.